You type a prompt and boom, an AI writes a full research paper or generates a photorealistic image in seconds. It feels like magic, right? Like it's just pulled completely out of thin air. But behind that incredible digital speed is a massive hidden physical crisis. You see, AI's biggest problem right now actually isn't a shortage of computer chips or a lack of coding talent. It's electricity. The physical infrastructure of our world is literally straining under the weight of this AI boom. And it all starts with the heavy machinery required to make it happen.
To actually power the massive data centers running these AI models, you need some incredibly heavy physical equipment. Most importantly, you need a massive piece of machinery called a generator step-up transformer, just to connect the facility to the grid. And right now, ordering one of those transformers comes with a staggering 144-week manufacturing delay. That is nearly 3 full years you have to wait just for the equipment to turn the lights on.
And this highlights the core contradiction of the AI energy crisis. Software scales instantly. Physical infrastructure absolutely doesn't. We're currently staring down a 30% supply deficit for U.S. power transformers, and the supply chain holding it all together is incredibly fragile. The U.S. currently imports 80% of its large power transformers, and for the highly specialized electrical steel needed to build the cores of those transformers, the entire country relies on just one single domestic steel producer, Cleveland-Cliffs. So why is there such a sudden, massive run on this heavy electrical equipment? Well, back in 2022, global data centers consumed around 460 terawatt-hours of electricity. But by 2026, the International Energy Agency projects that AI and data centers are going to consume over 1,000 terawatt-hours. To put that massive number into perspective, that is roughly equivalent to taking the electricity consumption of the entire country of Japan and just dropping it onto the global grid in a matter of a few years. To handle this kind of explosive demand, tech developers aren't just building normal data centers anymore. They're building massive AI factories. By 2035, developers expect a full third of all new data center campuses to exceed 1 gigawatt in scale. Now, what does a gigawatt actually mean in the real world? A single 1 gigawatt campus consumes as much power as 20% of all of New York City. Imagine plugging a fifth of New York into a single building. That is what our grid is being asked to support.
What's really fascinating here is the glaring reality gap between the tech industry and the utilities that actually generate the power. According to survey data from Bloom Energy, tech developers systematically underestimate how long it takes to get utility power. Grid operators are out there actively warning that it's going to take, on average, 1.5 to 2 years longer to deliver power than tech companies currently expect. The grid simply cannot move at the speed of Silicon Valley. Because electricity is now the ultimate bottleneck, it's physically redrawing the map of the tech world. Developers are actually fleeing gridlocked legacy markets. Places like California and Virginia are losing market share because they are just out of accessible power or they're facing years of delays. Instead, companies are flocking to places like Texas, which is projected to see an astonishing 142% increase in data center market share by 2028.
But here's the catch. Even the mighty Texas power grid is hitting its absolute limits. The grid operator there is currently staring down an unprecedented 438 gigawatt line of requests for new power connections. The sheer volume is so overwhelming that Texas actually passed a new law, Senate Bill 6, which forces large data centers to pay minimum 6-figure screening fees and legally commit to paying for transmission infrastructure costs just for the right to apply for a grid connection. Upgrading the grid to support all this AI is going to require billions of dollars in new physical steel cables, high-voltage towers, and massive substations across the country, which brings up a fierce, incredibly high-stakes debate. If the grid is maxed out and needs billions in physical upgrades just to support a few massive tech giants, who actually foots the bill? Does the tech industry pay for this massive physical expansion, or does that cost somehow fall on everyday citizens? And the human stakes here are incredibly high. This isn't just some abstract tech problem. It directly impacts the utility bills of regular people. Take Georgia, for example, where data centers are driving 80% of new power capacity demand. Regulators there are warning this could cause residential monthly utility bills to spike by up to 11% by 2028. Because of this, we're seeing major pushback from communities. In Ohio, regulators recently had to step in and order tech companies to protect regular ratepayers by covering their own grid upgrade costs. To escape these utility delays, the rising costs, and the pushback from local communities, the tech industry is pivoting hard. Their new strategy? If the grid can't power AI, AI will just build its own grid.
Nearly three-quarters of data center developers are now actively evaluating alternative technologies so they can generate their own power on-site. Things like fuel cells are emerging as a leading technology simply because they can provide fast, reliable on-site electricity without waiting years for a utility company to build transmission lines. But for the biggest players in the space, fuel cells aren't going to cut it. The desperation for vast amounts of continuous, carbon-free energy has driven Microsoft to do something truly historic. They just signed a massive 20-year agreement to literally restart a reactor at the infamous 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania. And this unprecedented effort is actually being backed by a $1 billion federal loan. Yet, here's the crazy part. Even restarting a nuclear plant requires plugging back into the regional grid, which normally exposes the project to those exact same multi-year delays for transmission upgrades we talked about earlier. So, how did they bypass the red tape? Well, Constellation Energy secured a special federal waiver. Instead of waiting years in line for new transmission studies, this waiver allowed them to just transfer the existing grid interconnection rights from an old fossil fuel gas plant directly to the nuclear reactor. Now, you might be wondering something completely logical right about now. With tech companies spending literally billions on nuclear plants and grid upgrades, won't the next generation of AI chips just be way more energy efficient? Won't smarter software naturally use less power and eventually solve this whole bottleneck? It's a very common counterargument, but history actually proves that when technology becomes more efficient, the exact opposite usually happens. This brings us to a fascinating economic concept called the Jevons paradox. It was famously observed back in 1865 by an economist named William Stanley Jevons. He noticed that when steam engines were suddenly made much more fuel efficient, Britain didn't actually end up using less coal. Because the efficient engines made operating costs so much cheaper, steam power was suddenly adopted by far more industries. And as a result, total coal consumption absolutely skyrocketed. Efficiency didn't save resources, it multiplied demand. And this perfectly illustrates what is happening in the AI race today, what we call an AI rebound effect. Step 1. Developers create better algorithms and chips that drastically reduce the energy needed for a single AI query. Step 2. This cheaper compute makes AI economically viable for a massive range of new industries, from healthcare logistics to fast food drive-thrus. Step 3. This sparks an exponential explosion in total AI usage worldwide, which completely outpaces and erases any of those initial energy savings from the hardware. So, to manage this relentless demand paradox, the actual physical design of data centers is fundamentally changing. Facilities entering development today are completely overhauling their architectures. They're abandoning traditional legacy designs in favor of next-generation high-voltage central busways and direct current electrical systems. This massive overhaul is necessary just to physically push enough raw electrical power to these incredibly power-dense AI server racks. So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is this. AI might look like a digital miracle floating effortlessly in the cloud, but its entire existence and its future relies heavily on physical power, massive infrastructure, steel, utility bills, and geopolitics. The AI race has truly become a race for physical electricity, which leaves us with one profound, unresolved question. If intelligence becomes one of the world's most valuable resources, who controls the electricity required to power it?